Formscapes, Flowscapes and Mindscapes. Cosmology of change. Let's get back to our definition of an alphabet. Basic classification of shapes. We started with the concept of a point as an aggregation of potentiality appearing on the background of otherness or relative emptiness. The sea of potentiality, unmanifested, where one aspect is manifested and differentiated. The line implied from the point the concepts of reiteration and linkage, connection. So the line was not only the multiplication of points that we could find in patterns like clusters, but the direct integration of different points into something that's perceived as a whole of itself. And the line implies the beginning of a feeling of movement, be it joining one end to the next, or even the soul creation of the line can be thought of as either this reiteration of punctual events of creation, or the first move, the first sequential linearity of change. In this aspect, it's not another entity of beingness appearing on the background of emptiness. It is the creation evolving into something else. So that would be if points were considered one after the other, and the awareness or consciousness would track down the line. That's how we commonly think of time, as a line. It's always what's perceived as a point appearing at the crest of a wave, joining the past and the not yet manifested, what's yet to be. So this idea of the line being drawn, so being stretched from one existence, being given another dimension, really, through this stretching event. The same point is not reiterated punctually, but starts to be part of a flow, a continuous flow, which gives birth to the line. So from the line we arrive to space, when this dimension unfolds to include another one. So it gets from one-dimensional to two-dimensional. The original point, without any contrasting measure, being thought of as non-dimensional, meaning that it cannot be compared to anything else. It appears as perception and as an entity of creation due to the background-front relationship it has with empty space. But as such, it is not a creation that can be compared to other creations yet. When other points arise, is this possibility from duality on of perception via comparison. So perception of dimensionality, diverse things. But the point, if it is zero-dimensional in all its aspects, has no. So zero-dimensional in all its aspects means the point is neither changing in color, in space location. Before you have a framework of reference, your space is just a featureless ocean of potentialities. So the only dimension that appears when you multiply it, the points, something you cannot actually picture, because the picture will bring the idea into this three-dimensional world where the points would not be at the same place and time. It's different for the non-dimensional concept of a background that has not yet been defined and organized in a frame in reference to points of reference, and then axes, directions connecting these points of reference and comparison. So when the points appear, the only dimension that creates a contrast and a perception are manifestation or not. So if we picture the point as ink, already it has many properties applied to it, and color and whatnot. If we picture the point as a pure unit of beingness and manifestation, the only measurable or comparable dimension of it is its appearance or not. The line creates this first dimension, this first linkage between points of reference. The line has at least 2 points of reference if it's limited. So if it's a segment, it will be the beginning and end. If it's an infinite line stretching from a point, it would be the beginning. If it's an infinite line perceived, it would be the point or points or area of perception. If it's a segment, you could find all the subdivisions of the segment as points of reference to, like the main ones being from 2 values you get a third, the middle point. From the third you get 5 with the 2 points in the middle of the middle, and so on. So all the fractions would arise as points of reference, displaying the ratio of parts compared to each other. So the punctuality being one pointed for the mind, concentration, going straight to the point, pointing at something. All these words relate to a way of doing, a way of thinking, a way of putting something in practice, be it in the physical, energetic, or informational world, that is completely focused and transient, like very ephemeral. Although a complex shape could appear due to the reiteration of a huge number of points, as can be seen in what they call the pointillist artist. Still, these points at first will be taken one by one, perceived as points and not perceived as space or volumes. These points in themselves are meaningless. They have no direction. The direction is here and now. So you perceive the here and now with no relationality to what will follow, what will flow from it. From the time you start to draw a line, this drawing, this stretching of the point, so the entity of beingness is sort of stretched as content spread out over one dimension of time or space or several later. The use of linearity as a concept for movement, for thought, for energy is very different from the one you can get using simply the point. Well, simply doesn't mean that the point gives less opportunities of action or less potentials than the line. But the line will give you something that the point doesn't. And the point will give you something that the line doesn't. The line will give you this stretching, this drawing, this extending, or the reverse movement going from the line to the point of contraction, reduction, concentration. So you have already these moves that you could picture in the extend and flex. The flexing implies another dimension, but the extend and retract, get back to the elasticity move, is already something that's apparent from the concept of linearity. The line can be thought of as an infinite number of units, or a finite number of units that you could actually pinpoint and count. So if you made a line by touching 10 coins side by side, the number of units contained in the lines would be 10, and that would be the measure in this one dimension. And then if you unfolded it in 2 dimensions, for instance 2 dimensions of space, you could get a line of 10 units stretching up or stretching forward in 10 rows or 10 stages, 10 levels. That would allow you to measure the surface. The surface being a measure of the number of units spread out in 2 dimensions. The same would apply once you get 10 rows of 10 coins. You could pile these coins on top of each other and count the dimensions of 8, and there you get the volume of the thing. So this is the practical application for measurement, but the conceptual application would be something close to it. A dimensionality is related to another one and would in some cases create a function. Function is what is done compared to another variable. So another aspect of perception is taken into account in a relationship with the first one. What is done, what's created out of that, is analyzed as the function. What will the space give us that the line does not? And what will it remove that the line add? So the space is a sort of an unfolding of a line in another dimension. Its practical applications would be the spread. I spread a surface and I multiply the contact points. I can also multiply the lines. So for practical application, the point would create the contact point. The concept of the line, for instance, would create the direction, the vector force, the depth of it. It would create the type of movement. If it's a movement, one directional movement going only into this line from one point, or all the points of the line, like all the points moving at the same time and joining their forces, instead of one dragging the others or one pushing the others. And then it could be a sequential activation of one, then the next, then the next, then the next, adding on their vector forces. So once we get to this directionality of the touch, which could be any line, it doesn't have to be straight. It could be a spiraling line. It could be a wave, like undulating line. But when we get to the concept of spread and the concept of surfaces, areas, we can, instead of focusing and concentrating our ability of acting or thinking or concentrating or perceiving, we can distribute it in mainly two ways. First, we can stretch it to the end, so we spread from the center to the periphery by giving more importance and more awareness to the periphery than to the original center. That's what we do when we say we go into peripheral vision. We increase the definition of the side, what's happening at the side, by removing part of the awareness that's focused on the center. Now, another version of it would be distributing the awareness and not extending it. So if you thought of the center as a country, a capital or something, it could start pushing the borders of the kingdom, the empire, whatnot, pushing the borders of knowledge or anything. As it does so, it sort of loses connection to its center and to the medium in which the center appeared. So if you push expeditions very, very far away from their base, they will lose you. In strategy, we'd say you're stretching the line of supply, which means that if you need to feed off what's produced in your home base, the further away you are, the more loss you incur, and the more expenses you're trying to feed something with energy. This energy or resources are produced somewhere. The ratio between the amount that's used to carry the supplies to the amount of supplies that can be used by the troops at the end of the line will give you the efficiency of the process. If you spend more energy to carry your goods to a remote area than the actual amount that remains for the people at the end of this line, you've wasted most of it. So self-sufficiency there would be a very strong ability, which would imply that every point of beingness that's stretching into unknown territories has the ability of becoming a center of its own right, a center of production, a center of decision, for instance. If they do not, and you you stretch away to the peripheries and extending into the unknown. Then obviously if you are, if you're an army and you need to wait for orders coming back from the central authority, you would have to send back and forth parts of your troops or messengers and wait all the time to get the return. This is a very strenuous, very long and inefficient process, which is one of the paralyzing, in some ways, one of the potential paralyzing effect of the spread of empires, of the spread of power, trying to make one dot multidimensional and still remain very, very concentrated, very centralized. The other notion of spread that counterbalances this is not the expansion towards the margins, the periphery or the borders, but the actual distribution, the equalizing principle. So this would apply to many things, but first we need to understand philosophically or practically, when you create a unit of beingness, you need to aggregate matter, energy, information, and potentialities or possibilities. You need to add them, aggregate them, and concentrate them. So what I mean there is so that anything exists or is seen or is perceived, which would be in some ways synonyms. You would need to get practically the matter that surrounds this thing become less dense, less occupying less space, so that the space of the thing being born and expanding can become more. To grow my body, I need to eat. Eating is taking things that I perceive as non-self and bringing them into the border of what I perceive as self, to break them down and transform them, transmute them into selfness, into components of the self. So that's the old Lynn Margulis depiction of food, for instance, as otherness being taken to become selfness or sameness, alterity being taken to become identity by the opening up of the doors of perception, the doors of alimentation. Similarly, the reverse process is expression or ejection, excretion, where you take things from the inside that are deemed unuseful or redundant or excessive or toxic to the inside, and you spit it out into the surrounding world. So it's one way would be you remove the excess, you remove toxicity, you try to remove waste and whatnot. Waste meaning only something that you cannot use, be it that you have too much of it, or you do not have the means of processing what it's made of. So it can be an excess of quantity, an excess of quality, a lack of energy to process it. And the other aspect of it would be you can send away something that you deem valuable and that will will be sent into the perceived otherness to either expand your selfness, your identity, or reproduce it, or generate a change that's deemed favorable. So for instance, you would have the concept of ejaculation is the sending of the seed to mix with another otherness and give rise to expansions of the identity. So they're not exactly identity, because the sexual process implies this creation of new alterities, but the concept would be the same. It's cell division at one level before would already be that. It's not really it's a bit different from taking something away from what's perceived as sameness or identity into otherness. It's the actual division. So taking something away as the exact same concept as division in some ways. It's just that relative scales of things will make the sending away seem, what's the part that's sent away seems much smaller than the part that remains. So we have this idea of one person is sent away, expelled or sent into an area from a country. But if what's sent away or what's removed or pushed away is half of the country, you would say that the country is dividing itself. It's not a sending away of something. It's just the relationality of this concept of spread. The spread creates a much stronger impression of differentiation. All lines, supposedly, if you do not create width and still use the concept of non-dimensional points repeating it ad infinitum, or stretched and actually augmented in just one dimension, all lines in some ways measure the same thing. Not all segments would measure the same thing, but all lines in theory stretch into infinity. All spaces, one could say they could stretch into infinity too, but when you get the measurement of an area as compared to another area, it creates a stronger impression than when you look at a line. This is a bit blurry, but when you add more dimensions of otherness, the otherness appears more. Although all these dimensions in potential could be reduced at nothingness and extended into infinity. So the use of the spread can be to take an incoming force and distribute its effect, or push the effects to the side, to extremities, to remove all areas, to the borders, for instance. You could let push or an energy go through you by extending the effects towards your periphery, towards your border. You could also distribute the effect. Instead of having all, like only the population and armies at the point of contact interacting with the incoming line of invaders, for instance. I could stretch in all directions of the, so in the 2 dimensions, but all the 8 directions of the surface, to create this feeling that I divide the incoming force at first in corridors. So I take the number of people, break them into 2 flows, say equal flows of 50 if there's 100 units, then 4 flows of 25, and then I would keep going like this. When I get to the full expression of the feeling of spread and distribution, I could get all the 100 people I get there, push them to the sides. I continue to express it until I feel the pressure nearly only at the periphery of my hand, or I could do the same by distributing them evenly or not, but when we imply distribution most of the time, the main difference is if you create sort of an equal spread of the quantity you're trying to distribute. A center that's broken down and distributed unevenly will create what we call a decentralized area first. So you create multiple centers, then smaller or other centers. So you decentralize. If you spread it, you distribute, and you create a common. If all people are submitted to the same pressures and have the same resources, they get the feeling of evenness, of homogeneity, which will have very strong consequences when we consider things like transmission of waves and transmission of wavelength through mediums of different density. The breaks, the points where one density goes into a denser area, so one area of density turns into an area of another density, will create a point of rupture oftentimes, which is what's used while splitting wood or any type of breaks or whatnot. So the idea of the spread there is also something that can be seen in 2 ways. We can have the concept that we have equality everywhere, but if equality and evenness and distribution is something we have and not a dynamic process, when things are completely even and then a big army, for instance, arrives somewhere, so when it arrives somewhere, the pressure will be felt very, very strongly in this place, although so where it arrives, it will create a difference, very strong difference. The fact that as the state things were equal in density, in any access to energy, resources, information, the fact that prior to the event they were equal will not change the fact that they will become very, very unequal when some incoming event or information or energy arrives. So that will not warrant any ability to spread the burden, for instance. So that's one one big topic that you can see applied in practical aspects as well as social or political aspects very often. What's most powerful is not equality as a constant evenness of things, but that make differentiation disappear. So absolute equality of all measurable dimensions would absolutely erase manifestation as the unfolding process of differentiation and diversification of the same unity. If, on the other hand, there's no state of equality or evenness, but there are vectors and processes pushing towards this, and still not actually trying to fix it or to block it, to make it a state instead of a flow. So when you have a felt process of distribution, when you have a tendency to rebalance and redistribute and equalize things, which is one aspect that's seen or studied a lot in the physical sciences. Entropy is one such aspect. You spread out the energy to recreate a sort of a very distributed net that's sort of equal in its in the size of its or the density of its meshes, and so this net can receive new changes and recreate new things. If you had only concentration of matter, energy, information, and no spreading effect, you would manifest the entirety of the potentialities available at one spot, and you would have emptied out all other possibilities. So I drifted a bit from the concept that existing is being torn out of the overarching unity and differentiated unity behind, but it is also practically the stealing of the potentialities, possibilities, and matter and energy of the things surrounding you to create and expand and develop the you, the identity. You take matter, you remove the lives of plants, animals, or if you expand it, you remove the lives of molecules. You break down molecules. So if you take life as the process of change over time, and you extend it without getting caught up into the more focused definition of biological life, when you break down any molecule to get, say, the oxygen, or you break down molecules so that you can use the transfer of energy into your metabolism or your abilities to communicate information. When you do this, in some ways you're destroying the continuity of one type of entity, which is the same you do when you cut a plant. The plant as a bigger entity may still exist, because cutting the leaves or cutting a stem with roots still on will not forcibly kill the plant, It may even prove in some ways beneficial to the overall plant, like you have stress of growth. But still you're taking life in some way or another to feed your own life. In much the same way, normally you're constantly dying, you're constantly losing cells, losing matter, and this feeds the world around you, or feeds other organisms around you that may take it from you, like parasites or predators, or that may just use the waste product you created, like what we call decomposers. The concept of the equalizing principle is a necessary counterbalance to the aggregation, concentration, and centralizing process of existence, of manifestation, of all the things that can be when I exist, or when I express just one thing at this same given space and time, the same given framework of dimensions. No other thing can occur. So I have taken all the potentialities, and in maths I have reduced the wave of probabilities to one manifested state. The concept of spread is the return movement. I take all these potentialities, manifest them in one point, one event, one unit, 1 second, one action, one thought, one word. When I even out things, when I distribute the potentialities, so silence is the most distributed potentiality of words, of expressions. It's a non-manifested potentiality, or it's a manifested potentiality by contrast. My silence can carry meaning on the background of my usual words or attitudes, but still you get the drift. So now the practical uses of this feeling of spread. I can multiply. I could already do that on the line. The line can spread the points of contact, give directions, but most of the time it will be focused and directional. The surface can use the line and push it evenly into another direction. As a tube that's pushed, it doesn't change its width, it doesn't change its length, but it's pushed in a direction that it did not manifest into before. I can expand the things that the line allowed, like the line allowed for curving and stretching, which will give, if you include double movements of extension, retraction, we call elasticity, you get this movement of flexing, stretching and bending. This force applied in the middle stretch forward, backwards, apply a force H2. This force applied creates another vector force at 90 degrees, and you already enter the realm of the spread. Spreading the base of support maximizes the transmission of forces with the ground, and conversely tends to lower the gravity center. If the units of matter are the same, when you spread widely the base, you lower the overall edifice. If you retract and concentrate the base completely, you make the edifice stand tall for the same amount of that's how you distribute your matter in the dimensions of space. You have the same amount of matter, you can use it to reach, so to spread forward or backwards, to expand sideways, for instance, and to grow upwards or downwards. So now let's get into the concept of volumes. I can use a line to wrap around something, or to circle around something, or spiral around something. And so doing, I will multiply the points of contact. I will potentially augment friction and my ability to exert force over the object, as seen in the corkscrew, for instance. When this gains width, there's a much greater increase in friction, in points of contact. So more distribution, that will mean also more ability for the interacting object or entity to act upon me as well, or to react or send messages. I open bigger doors in between castles. So this end touching the other end is a bigger point of contact and bigger door of transmission than the tip of my finger. The tip of my finger allows only for very concentrated use of my force, like bringing all the troops that could be carried in the big corridor of my arms, of my body, my legs, my body, then my arms, then my forearms, then my hands, then my fingers. This will create a very strong concentrating or focusing effect. If it's done properly, it creates sort of a venturi effect. You compress to accelerate or strengthen at the end. If done improperly, you'll create many areas of slowing down or congestion. You block the flow. So when you get to use full volumes, you can move much more units of energy, matter, information, life than you could before. You do a timeline of anything with just events depicting the life of one unit of interest, which could be a person, could be a country, could be an idea, whatnot. So this idea, this person will have length. You'll be able to compare what happened in all the points of this dimensionality. If you start to spread this timeline to the timeline of other peoples or other things appearing at the same time, you start to gain width into your view of what was happening. If you're considering a line of arguments, if you consider parallel lines of other potential arguments that could complete or that could present alternatives or counteract the first line you used, you create potentiality of argumentation that's much more wide and opened. If we take this as a decision tree or more practically as pathways, my path is a line. If it's limited to its length, and as soon as I meet an obstacle somewhere, so I have to take the same line, curve it around, move, change, recreate or relocate the entirety of the matter and energy of the line somewhere else. If I have width, I can have many different pathways, and when I need to branch out from one that meets a block, I can already access another one's pre-existing. I do not need to spend too much energy again to dig it, to create it. So that's this concept of width. And if I get into the volume aspect of things, then I could have potentialities of digging underground and going below, flying and going above, and there I would have the concept of depth added. And my arguments too could have many stratas of depth. So my thinking, instead of being punctuated or then linear and then like sort of surfacial or surfacial, one way it's depicted could be superficial. Now it's not superficial, it doesn't touch only the one layer, especially the skin or the outer border of things, but it can have depth. It can consider what's happening at all the various layers of, or layers or levels or stratas of the same phenomenon. So the depth of an analysis would see what's happening, say physically, as related to what's happening energetically, what's happening emotionally, what's happening mentally, what's happening socially, what's happening technically in the means that I used, what's happening psychically, and what's happening spiritually, for instance, if we depicted just what happened into one human being. In-depth analysis of a country or geopolitical situation would consider what's happening geographically with what's happening strategically, what's happening politically inside each country, what's happening ideologically, what's happening economically, financially, and so on and so on. So the more layers, the more levels, because we can superimpose upon each other, the more depth we can create. That's what you see in the GIS systems, geographical information systems, where you layer natures of information that you can map by combining one on top of the other and reducing you increase the transparency of one, so that if you put two layers on top of each other with complete focus of awareness on both, they'll cover each other. They will erase each other oftentimes. Like if it's a drawing and you're using transparent sheets and superimposing them, if the sheets are not transparent, when you put one layer of attention or attentionality on top of another layer, it will make the former one disappear. So we need a way to decrease the amount of awareness that we have of something, or the definition of something. We leave parts of the information that can be superimposed with another layer which has similarly been softened or been depleted of part of its information too, so that they can appear both together. So the use of layers, for instance, in practical applications, at first would appear with the use of two layers. Instead of moving energy on a line, or you move gravity on a line, you follow your column, for instance. If you move units of mass, and you move more mass upwards, more mass downwards, more mass to the extremities in both directions, or you compress them. When you stretch it, you get the spread effect. Then you can do this using three lines, the lines of the two lateral columns. You could break down using two mid lines that would give you 5 lines and get more and more. It would be the same as adding more strings to a guitar that you can tune together and articulate and play together. And now when you from all these strings you wove them into surfaces, you can stretch the skin the way you would stretch it to scrape it for when you skin an animal to make buckskin or something, or the way you would tune a drum, a djembe or something, or the way you would stretch a trampoline to increase the rebound. So in the same way, you got all this power by going from linearity to spread and stretch and surfaces. And when you double the surface, when you get, for instance, you get the feeling of wrapping around with sort of plastic papers, getting to know the feeling of your skin or fascia. So you stretch a layer, a surface, into 3 dimensions, and you create the feel of the volume. So that's the first take you'll get on volume. Moving 2 surfaces, say parallel to each other, you extend the upward part of your arm. At the same time, in a conveyor belt effect, the lower part of your arm is retracting, and the reverse. You stretch down all the anterior frontal part of your body, and then you wrap it around your pelvis and spread upwards. So you get this feeling. And when you give depth to this multi-layered feeling, you add layers until you get the continuity of layers, where you will get the feel of actual volumes. and these volumes, you'll have all the opening potentialities that come with it. But we'll see that another time.